appropriate moment, we'll try and find a way to respond to those questions. Thank you. God bless. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the day we've put together. Thank you.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be back with you today. I remember that the first time I came to a meeting was what was then called the Conference of Major Religious Superiors. The Irish Taoiseach once dismissed criticism of the government's budget by our Irish brothers and sisters by saying he couldn't take seriously any organisation which called itself both major and superior. Anyway, on that first occasion, 32 years ago, 1988, I appeared at the meeting rather nervously, wearing my habit, only to be told witheringly by a sister, "You must be insecure if you still have to wear that old thing." Well, I almost didn't wear it today, but I thought I'd put it on just in case she was still watching. I really am sorry that I'm only here with you by Zoom. Probably like you, I long to see real human faces. You know, faces that laugh and agree and disagree. But of course, the tremendous thing about Zooming is that if you get bored, you can just turn me off and go and read the papers. Bernadette wrote to me that an earlier concept for the day was endings. But she said, we'd like the day to be framed in a more positive light as a proactive challenge to congregations to adapt and see freshness in new beginnings. She said, not a lament for the past, but a clarion call to welcome and embrace the necessary changes brought about by altering demographics. And so we must embrace the future with hope. I think that this is an admirable shift of focus and completely right. But a really fundamental question I want to put to you is, whose future are we embracing with hope? I'm convinced religious life will have a bright future only if we are seen to be primarily concerned not with our own future, but with that of other people, especially the young, and those who are perishing, those for whom the future seems to have disappeared. Titus Shadon wrote, "The future belongs to those who give the next generation reason to hope." So are we doing that? I also thought it's good for a Dominican to start with a quotation from a Jesuit, just to show that I'm without any prejudice. Today there is a crisis of hope for everyone, but especially for the young. We hardly dare to imagine what the world will be like in 1 year's time, let alone 50. We've already begun the 6th great extinction of life on this planet. And for the young, the pandemic has stolen even the immediate future. No gap years, none of the festive excitement of being a fresher, new jobs, or of escape from parental home. Religious life has always had a radiant future when we've let ourselves be touched by the crises of our contemporaries. St. Benedict responded to the vast crisis of the end of Roman culture and the rise of barbarianism. St. Francis and Dominic dived into the new urban world, the new intellectual questions of the 13th century, when all the old certainties were crumbling. Ignatius of Loyola, the Ursulines, the Capuchins, Mary Ward embraced Renaissance Europe with all its exciting new understanding of the individual and the challenge of the Counter-Reformation. Most modern congregations were born in response to the Industrial Revolution and all the poverty and suffering that it brought. So my intuition, well, actually my conviction, is that religious life will have a future if we are profoundly touched by the future of those who seem to have none. If we think primarily of our survival, we won't. Jesus didn't say, "I've come that they may survive and survive abundantly." Now, honestly, some congregations will not survive, at least in this country. This is not a sign of failure. Sometimes we preach by dying. Many of my brethren preached best by how they died. For some, actually, it was their first good sermon ever. How some congregations face the death of their communities or their provinces may be a wonderful witness to our belief in the resurrection. One of my closest friends, David Sanders, Dominican, we joined the same day, died of COVID a few months ago. And when he approached death, he said, "Well, I believed in the resurrection. I preached the resurrection all my life. Now is the time to show that I believe it." So that's what we have to do, faced with the death of some of our congregations. Now, I believe that our crazy way of life, with our odd vows, forms us as signs of hope for those who have no hope. I believe that each of the three vows is an expression of hope in an uncertain time. And if we embrace them generously, wholeheartedly, we're going to know how to manage the decline of our numbers. And that decline won't seem so important. Let's begin with poverty. At the conclusion of the Synod of Religious Life in 1994, Cardinal Echegaray pleaded for religious to rediscover the beauty of poverty. For him, that was the sine qua non of all renewal. He said that if we are poor, we may have a future. If not, no way. Some religious in Britain are indeed poor in an obvious way, but most of us are not. One religious of another order, I won't mention which, said to me, "Oh, we only take one vow in our order. It's the vow of comfort." Our different communities, quite rightly, understand poverty differently. There's a difference between a Jesuit and a Franciscan understanding of poverty, or between a Benedictine or a Dominican idea of being poor. But there's one form of poverty which many congregations do have today. For the Old Testament, it was the most radical poverty of all, which is to be childless. The promise to Abraham and Sarah was that they would have as many children as the sand on the seashore. Baron Hannah's song in 1 Samuel 2 is the cry of those who are robbed of the greatest richness, a fertile womb. The time of salvation begins with an old woman and a virgin having children. But it culminates in that horrible negation, a young man dying on a cross, unmarried and without heirs. Most congregations in Britain are childless. And even those which do have vocations are feeling the pinch. Being without children carries the threat of oblivion. Who will remember us? Who will carry on our name? Maybe in other countries where vocations are still numerous, but not here. We must even hand over or close institutions which might have carried our name forward. The list brings sadness to my heart. Downside, Shaftesbury, Heathrop, and I think the Franciscan Study Centre. And in these moments, when we are childless, we're close to Christ hanging on the cross, somebody without apparent heirs. When I was provincial of the English province, again right back in 1998, I went with a former provincial down to the Isle of Wight to visit Carisbrooke, the last remaining Dominican monastery of nuns in Britain. There were 4 nuns, 3 of them were ancient. And one of them said, "But Timothy, our dear Lord would not let Carisbrooke die, would he?" And Peter said, "But God let his son die." The experience of many of us being childless puts us in a wonderful position to witness to our hope for the future, because we are close to them. We can speak to those who see no future. Many children, many young people don't even dare to have children, seeing the catastrophe that is looming. They don't want to bring children into a world that seems doomed. Or I think of somewhere where my heart is very close to, the Dominican sisters in Iraq. They hang on there when there seems to be no future. The Christian communities in the Middle East are decimated. The villages in the plain of Nineveh, which are the center of Christian life, for hundreds of years, they've been decimated. But they hang on, building schools for the children that remain, Christian, Muslim, Yazidi. And when I visited Homs in Syria, I found a city half destroyed, as if it had been hit by a nuclear bomb. And in the small community where the Dutch Jesuit Frans van der Lucht had been martyred in 2014, there I found an old Egyptian Jesuit still in his post, still teaching, still caring for the children. So faced with the future, many of us are poor. We're stripped of heirs like Christ on the cross. And this gives us a wonderful opportunity to witness to hope. Because at least in this country, most of us got no earthly reason to do so. We believe that there is a future, even if we cannot imagine what form it will take. It will surprise us. As Mary Magdalene was astonished to meet the gardener on Easter morning, who called her by her name, Mary, Rabboni. Embrace the future with hope. And I think we do so most explicitly with our vow of obedience. Now again, our congregations have different understandings of obedience. Dominicans have a very democratic obedience, which is rather different from Jesuit obedience, which puts more stress on the role of superior. A Jesuit friend told me that one says to a newly appointed superior, "You look after us on the way up, and we will look after you on the way down." But for all of us, surely obedience is never the blind submission to a superior who wants us to plant cabbages upside down. Obedience is primarily attending to the one who calls us to live in the future. Obedience is being summoned to journey by the Lord, and we do not know where. Abraham obeyed the voice of one calling him to go from Ur of the Chaldees to the promised land. Moses obeyed the voice summoning him to lead his people out of Egypt. And we go on being called day by day. We begin the day most often with Psalm 94. Oh, that today you would listen to my voice. Obedience is setting off day after day, embracing the unknown future, letting go of the past. It's the vow to keep on traveling. At this moment, I think especially of the monks of St. Gregory's, planted in Douai, setting off to Acton Bernal, making their way to Downside at the beginning of the 9th century, and now soon they will be off again. They don't know where. That is the obedience of the pilgrim. And it has profound implications for how we plan for the future of our provinces and congregations. Forgive me if I'm a bit oversimplistic. The obedience of the pilgrim means that every decision is about opening our future mission, especially when our numbers are declining. The temptation is always to ask, what shall we close? How can we retreat from our communities? How can we manage decline? Pilgrim obedience always asks, what is the Lord summoning us to do now? It's always, what shall we open? What shall we begin? What new initiatives beckon? We may have to close 3 communities to open 1 new one, but at least we shall be doing so proactively, not letting ourselves be victims of circumstances, not with the mentality of retreat. I love the story of the French General Foch, who in a perilous situation in the First World War sent a message to his superior general, my centre is giving way, my right is in retreat, the situation is excellent, I shall attack. That is a man who keeps the initiative, even in a time of disaster. I was filled with admiration for our Francophone Belgian Dominicans in recent years. Numbers are collapsing, few vacations. They had one really successful project, a thriving parish. So what did they do? They closed it to start 2 new university centres. That's obedience to the Lord of the future. Keeping your mind and your heart open to what must begin. I think this pilgrim vow of obedience profoundly shapes our sense of identity. It's a promise not fully to know who you are until the end of the journey. One of my favorite biblical texts, which I quote ad nauseam, is from 1 John 3. Dear friends, now we are children of God. What we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. All our identities are provisional, partial until then. Obedience even puts all our identities in the brackets, even my identity as a Dominican. And this is the hope we share for the young today who wonder who they are and for whom identity is a key question. The usual markers of identity are subverted. Class, ethnicity, geography, history, even gender no longer give us a secure sense of who we are. When I was a child, going with my large family to St. Mary's Ascot for benediction every Saturday, gender determined every aspect of one's being, even one's clothing, which way round one's belt went, which side of one's head one's hair was parted, and I had more hair to part then, of course, but we knew who we were. Today, the young feel that they must decide who they are. They must choose. According to the American dream, anyone can be anything they want, which is, of course, absurd. Imagine the terrible burden of the young choosing and sustaining an identity. I could no more be an astrophysicist than I could run a 4-minute mile. Which is why on the web, so many young people have multiple identities on multiple websites. Now, I understand it can be fun, trying on identities, seeing what fits, rather like Imelda Marcus trying on shoes. But Christians have the vast freedom of not having fully to know who we are. We listen to our brothers and sisters asking us to do crazy things and be implausible people. In my case, to my surprise, Master of the Order. When I was elected, a distinguished curial cardinal went to every dicastery saying, the Dominicans have gone mad. And I thought he was right. But the beauty of this vow is that we are obedient to other people's sense of who we might become. We don't have to know. Others know of what we're capable, which is why in the Dominican tradition, one should never ask anyone whether they're prepared to be a candidate for leadership. The best would rule themselves out. Leave it to others to discern. And this freedom of not knowing who you are is especially a strong witness today when the old markers of our religious identity are gone. The status is no more. The institutions that defined us, as I said, are largely lost or handed out. Indeed, many of us carry burdens of identities that are humiliating, even crushing. Identities derived from our failures, from the sexual and physical abuse committed by our brothers and sisters. But our very names are not labels, but invitations to journey. We are named after saints who've gone before us, and they beckon to follow us. Our names are pointers on the journey. So weak and wavering Peter is called the Rock. One day he would become like a rock. Childless Abraham's name means the father of a multitude. And what about you, each of you? Bernadette means, Wikipedia tells me, brave little bear. I've no idea if that is a present or a future description. And Wikipedia admitted that it had absolutely no idea what Ino meant at all. And so the vow of obedience is good news for a society which is fears for the future. It's the promise to listen for a future beyond our imagining. It challenges us to take on new missions rather than to labor to shore up fragile identities. We don't have to know who we are. God knows. That's enough. Even our brothers and sisters know better than we ourselves. And finally, very briefly, chastity. I would love to talk for an hour, but since I suggested to the organizers that no one should have to listen to a Zoom lecture for more than half an hour, I must be brief. Embrace the future with hope. What is the future for which we long? It's the kingdom of God in which all division is ended, all wounds are healed, our tears are wiped away, and love conquers all hatred. This has been the millennium dream of Christians for 2,000 years. But for many millennials today, it looks like wishful thinking. The Enlightenment belief in unending progress towards freedom, democracy, is in retreat everywhere. Strong men are claiming dictatorial powers all over this globe. State power is on the rise, even though it's weak in the face of giant multinationals who do not pay their tax. Culture wars are poisoning our cultures. Look at the American election, a country torn apart by warring tribes who can't talk to each other. Opponents are cancelled, silenced. Never in my lifetime has the victory of universal love seems so far away. But the vow of chastity is a bold sign love will have the victory. We promise to love whoever turns up on our community, whoever rings the front doorbell, who stops us in the street, or lies wounded by the side of the road. We refuse the narrow tribalism of our time with its fake news and its dumbing down and its facile slogans. In the name of the kingdom, we refuse absolute allegiance to any small group, whether of the left or the right. That's the deepest meaning of our chastity. It's not the only sign of the kingdom, marriage is another, but this is our way. The vow of chastity is the refusal of the culture wars that are tearing society apart. It's the refusal to be appropriated by any tribe. I hope we do have strong political and theological convictions, but these should not close our hearts and minds to those with whom we disagree. This is countercultural. It's a rejection of a culture which cancels other points of view and which locks one in small bubbles of shared ideology. Chastity means we're all ready for conversation. It's about much, much more than not having sex. In my experience, Dominican provinces have a future if they're prepared to accept young people who will challenge them, who will think differently. If they don't, they die. They're like families who dare not have children. So that means that at the heart of chastity is this preparation, this preparedness to talk, to debate, to listen. Sunny Singh is professor at the London Metropolitan University and turns down invitations to debate because debate is, I quote, an imperialist, capitalist, white supremacist, heteropatriarchal technique. Now I can see what Singh means, you might be surprised to hear. A lot of debate is about squashing the opposition, but to reject this conversation is to despair of the future of civilization. So chastity means keeping our hearts open to other generations, refusing to dismiss them as conservative or traditionalist. If we do that, we shall indeed have no future. Surely we can only be a sign of future for the next generation if we befriend the young, even if we do not always completely understand them. If we refuse the suffocation of small-minded labels and the tyranny of the like-minded. So the time for me to talk has come to an end. When the future of religious life is in doubt for many communities, we must think practically what we can do. How should we care for the old? Shall we look to other provinces from other countries to prop us up, or shall we die gracefully? These are important questions which merit discussion. You may want to raise them later in the day. But I've argued there is a much more fundamental question to which our answer to these questions depends. How do we have hope for the young, for those who are in despair? If we open ourselves to their crises, we may have a future ourselves. And even if we don't have a future, our lives will be fruitful in ways we cannot conceive. If we become introverted and over-concerned with the survival of our institutions, we won't. Poverty, obedience, and chastity form us as people whose lives are orientated to the future, to the kingdom. Come, Jesus. Maranatha. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. I'm sure all of you that are here agree